Pat from Big Hairy News has once again conducted a softball interview of Rawiri Waititi, one of the most prominent idiots in New Zealand politics. Like the last interview, this interview was pathetic, with many stupid claims made, and an almost complete lack of pushback or serious questions. It was a good example of a weak partisan interview. There are a few clips I want to respond to, so let's get started.
Well, listen, I've just come from an interview with Chris, and I asked him about you guys, and he said, well, I've said this to them in private, so I'll tell you what he told us, and then we'll see if he said it in private, and if he did it, you can respond to it now. He said, he either said I would say this, or I did say this, you remember? I can't remember. That I would tell them they need to sort themselves out.
Well, I think they need to sort themselves out too.
I'm just saying, I'm just the messenger here. How would you respond to that?
Hey, look, if you're going to define people from the, some of the, I wouldn't say dysfunction, but the disagreements in parties, then hell, you wouldn't have a government, would you? And so, you've had ACT and New Zealand First have scraps amongst themselves publicly, David Seymour, Winston Peters, and then you've got internal strife now happening with Labour, with the departure of some of their MPs. You've got to say, well, Te Pāti Māori won't work with you, Chris, until you sort your internal rauris and factions out. And so I'm not going to shy away from, yes, every party has it. Every community has it.
Rawiri tries to downplay the implosion of his party by gesturing to very minor affairs concerning other parties. He is trying to pretend what has happened to the Maori Party is normal. If this ever becomes normal in New Zealand politics, we will become a politically unstable, third world country. There is nothing normal about expelling a third of your MPs. This is not even remotely comparable to anything that has happened in another party. When was the last time Labour or National expelled 33% of their MPs? This idiot has the gall to compare it to a few Labour MPs retiring. As is normal, a few Labour MPs have announced that they are standing down at the coming election. All of this was done in an orderly manner, with no infighting or chaos whatsoever. Total stability was maintained within the Labour Party. And this moron thinks that this is comparable to his party expelling a third of its MPs. No other party has had anything even remotely comparable to the implosion of the Maori Party. An implosion that was motivated by self-serving cynicism, not principles or ideas. It is pathetic, and there is no excuse for it. This whataboutism is pathetic. No party has experienced internal chaos that even comes close to this. And he compared it to ACT and New Zealand First fighting, as though two separate parties clashing is somehow comparable to a party collapsing into infighting and losing a third of its MPs. What an utter joke. These arrogant idiots cannot even govern themselves, and yet they expect to govern the country, when they can't even govern a caucus of 6 people. What an utter joke.
I don't know about the Greens, but Labour is sort of taking a step back now. From how do you run this year with those kind of parameters?
Well, look, let me put it this way. Tiwi Māori and Māori people as a whole are usually at the back of the bus anyway. And what we're seeing here is Te Pāti Māori being pushed at the back of the bus, so we're just being pushed with the rest of our people. But look,
as you would expect, the clown tries to blame the party's isolation on racism. This is obvious nonsense. The Maori Party is isolated because it has imploded and expelled a third of its MPs. Such a thing could easily cripple a government. It is highly likely that the next government will have a tiny majority, so this kind of instability is rightly viewed with concern. The explanation is not racism. In the past, both Labour and National have been willing to cooperate with the Maori Party, but now the party has imploded and they rightly distance themselves from it. The idea that this is because of racism is just an example of a perverse victim mindset in action. They refuse to take responsibility for anything. And in politics, that is a very dangerous thing.
In an unapologetic Māori voice in Parliament. But not just a Māori voice, it's a voice that is there to protect the whole of Aotearoa. So when people hear Te Tiriti o Waitangi, they kind of shim in their boots. And my thing is that Te Tiriti o Waitangi is there to protect all of Aotearoa.
Yeah.
From international exploitation, from corporate greed. And that's been the barrier for a long time. Hence why the fast track legislation. Hence why you've got the oil moguls, ramming through legislation through the parties that they support. New Zealand First, ACT, National.
Rawiri repeats the common ridiculous line about how only the treaty can protect New Zealand from the exploitation of the corporations. No. Is every country that doesn't have a treaty totally screwed, doomed to be exploited by corporations? Obviously not, but this is the logical conclusion of this idiotic reasoning. A strong constitution, anti-corruption policies, regulation, pro-worker policy. There are plenty of other policies that can protect New Zealand from being ravaged by neoliberalism. The idea that the treaty is the only way we can defend ourselves is total nonsense. By this standard, every other country is doomed, powerless in the face of neoliberalism. Of course, the main purpose of the treaty is to empower iwi. Iwi function like businesses and are controlled by wealthy elites. They are more than happy to pillage our resources for their own benefit. They are little better than corporations. They are highly hierarchical, profit-seeking organisations. Already, they have major stakes in the fisheries industry. They are very happy to exploit our resources. The treaty is not a serious safeguard. Not unless you believe the noble savage myth about Maori being naturally good with the environment. Go tell that to the moa. No people has an inherent concern for the environment. Every people is able and willing to exploit the environment. That is the sad reality. Iwi are no more trustworthy than Pakeha corporations.
And let's just make it clear, history shows that Labour have always turned their back on Te Pāti Māori. They have never gone into any coalition.
Ever? Is that right?
No coalition with Te Pāti Māori. Helen Clark says she wouldn't work with Te Pāti Māori if they were the last cab off the rank. Jacinda Ardern, we went to meet with Jacinda Ardern, at the beginning of our term. Mm-hmm. And again, she denied an opportunity for us to sit at the table with them at that particular time. We did the same with Chippy when he became the Prime Minister for a very short period of time. And so the history shows that Labour haven't at this particular time, and we've worked pretty good with Labour on opposition benches, actually even in government benches. So when they were the government, we actually got a lot of our policy manifesto across the line from the opposition. Mm-hmm. Electoral law changes, increase the funding to Matatini, increase funding to whānau ora. We were the only ones that campaigned on a Māori Health Authority. All of those things we were able to get across the line in opposition whilst the Labour were in government. We've been also able to work with them in very small kaupapa, well, not small kaupapa, but some kaupapa like the Treaty Principles Bill, the Regulatory Standards Bill. We had meetings as we headed into some of the Select Committee meetings to see how we could align in our regards to the attack on those particular things to ensure that we were able to achieve what we were able to achieve. And so we've been able to work with Labour in those particular spaces, and we would just hope that they could see that and see that we were able to work closely together on some of those kaupapa.
Rawiri cannot even keep his messaging coherent. First he claims Labour has always shunned the Maori Party and has never been willing to cooperate. Then he totally switches this narrative and starts bragging about all the great things they achieved working with Labour. So what one is it? These two narratives are blatantly contradictory and blatantly self-serving. They want to portray themselves as both shunned outcast victims and highly experienced and accomplished. You cannot have it both ways. A normal interviewer would pounce on these blatant contradictions, but softball Pat lets it fly. It is a pathetic excuse for journalism. And it is not the first time. BHN interviewed the co-leaders on their show previously, and it was a total joke. You would think you would use the occasion to ask some hard questions. I know that the other host, Chewy, strongly supports Ukraine. Rawiri has repeated Russian propaganda, blaming the Ukraine war on NATO, and saying New Zealand should not support Ukraine. Rawiri alluded to this in the interview, and received no serious pushback whatsoever. Rawiri repeatedly praised Ibrahim Traore, a Putin-backed African dictator who recently criminalized homosexuality. And BHN provided literally no pushback as the moronic Rawiri romanticized and praised this man. It was the epitome of irresponsible platforming. Letting these morally bankrupt idiots abuse their platform to spout their bile for close to 2 hours. And this interview is yet another example of that. BHN was so excited about how candid and relaxed the discussions with the Maori Party are. That is because you never ask them hard questions. That is because you let them spout total crap with no pushback. Of course they like talking to BHN, it is like Trump going on One America News Network. They get a free platform to spout nonsense, with no opposition in sight. It is white guilt in action. Some white liberals fear nothing more than being called racist. It is a nightmare worst-case scenario for them. And they have tolerated and empowered the worst fringe of Maori politics on this basis. Enough is enough. They need to grow up and start holding these morons accountable. I think BHN is well-meaning and can play a positive role in the discourse. I do think that overall they are beneficial as the media space is infested with right-wing crap. But come on, get your act together. It is hard to take your valid criticism of ACT and National seriously when you are totally blind to stupidity on the far left.